The balance of the car, fragments too deep or too delicate to be recovered, remained as they had been since 1958, integrated into rock and silt. The divers tagged the coordinates but never came back. The current was too unreliable, the depth too extreme. The Columbia had taken back what it had previously lost. Over the next several years, the Martins' disappearance changed once more from tragedy to enigma to legend. The legend became integrated with the river itself. Late-night truckers claimed to catch glimpses of fleeting light beneath the cliffs, like moving headlights underwater. Fishermen reported strange things caught in their hooks, distorted chrome, a button, a flash of red vinyl that turned to dust in their hands, and on misty mornings when the wind crept low over the water, a few said they could hear it. Faint themes of Christmas music mangled by distance, coming and going like static out of another era. Perhaps it was but the fantasy of a town that had endured too long with silence, or perhaps memory, like the river, never quite relinquishes. It just keeps going, carrying its secrets along. Arch's discovery was as close to peace as the case would ever come for the remaining investigators. Peace and truth, however, are not the same. They had evidence, but no narrative that explained it. If it were an accident, why had no one witnessed or heard it? Why did two of the girls appear months afterwards, far from one another, and from where they found the car? If it was a murder, who would kill an entire family? And why abandon a house completely undisturbed, a half-decorated Christmas tree still awaiting them? The answer remained where it had always remained, under the water. Today, the Columbia is no different from the pictures taken in 1958. The same gray current, the same cliffs slumped over it like exhausted witnesses. Underneath that surface is the rest of the Martins' car, its frame welded to the rock, its secrets welded into the metal. The current flows over it, constant and eternal. The only thing that is still living in the tale. It whispers the same riddle that has plagued Oregon for almost 5 lives and 1 car that would not remain buried. If this tale sends shivers down your spine, there are more cold cases waiting to be shed light upon. Subscribe to see the next mystery in which the truth does not disappear. It just hides deeper. Police started by charting out all possible avenues the Martins could have possibly taken, east along the Columbia River, north into Washington, or south through the rural areas of Oregon. But whichever direction they traced, all roads led to one inevitable dead end: nothing. Officers scoured local motels and diners looking for someone to have seen the family. No one had. Kenneth's credit accounts reflected no recent use. He had taken around $200 in cash out of the house, enough then, a good sum to live on for a few weeks if they'd had some motive to vanish. There was no indication they did. No debts, no enna of noted debt, no enna, no debts, no enna, no enna, no goodness. No, much less than West is the world's runs running for the energy and the put odds. Where else runs an all it's just a nice, ordinary family going Christmas shopping. It didn't take long for the press to give the mystery a name: the Vanishing Martins. Initially, there was still hope. Perhaps it was merely a sad accident, a vehicle veered off the road, stuck somewhere out of the way. The Columbia Gorge was beautiful and dangerous, lined with steep drop-offs, blind turns, and skinny roads with minimal to no guardrails. A single miscalculation in that winter fog could be enough to send a vehicle crashing into the frozen river below. Rescue personnel combed the riverbanks looking for skid marks, snapped branches, anything. The water that week was high and swift, filled with rain and snowmelt. Divers dove into the river in shallow areas, but visibility was almost zero. They emerged with nothing but driftwood, pieces of metal, and a very old tire. Nothing. Nothing. Then the rumors came. One reported seeing a blue Ford station wagon stationed around Cascade Locks. Another said he'd seen a similar car going east after dark. Every tip had searchers dashing out into the cold, only to return with empty arms. Weeks passed. What had begun as a missing persons investigation was starting to seem like something out of a horror story. How could 5 individuals, a vehicle, and everything simply disappear? No tire, not even a lost scarf or shoe. By mid-December, the story dominated headlines across Oregon. Volunteers from nearby towns joined the effort, their flashlights sweeping through misty woods along the Columbia. The state police sent planes to search from above, hoping sunlight might glint off metal somewhere below, but again, nothing. Kenneth's fellow workers, distraught and bewildered, chipped in funds to continue the search. He was the most reliable Mills. If something had occurred, he'd have figured out a way to let us know. But no word ever arrived. Christmas came with a pain rather than a joy. The Martins family could not force themselves to have a service. They did make a vigil, however, leaving the porch light on throughout New Year's Eve, just in case. There was a haunting photograph on the local paper, the Martin house, dark and lifeless, windows reflecting nothing but snow falling. The caption was, "That photo lingered in the minds of people for generations, the isolated house radiating softly in the Oregon darkness." By January, the area of search had widened, but the result was always the same. Regardless of theory, regardless of effort, all leads melted into nothing. The Martins had been there, and then they were gone. No ransom demands, no appearances, no evidence of crime. Just a normal family who'd gone out to do some Christless normal family who'd gone out to do some Christmas for we can see there in little there were still soft too on sore and what the sound. Just a normal family who'd gone out to do some Christy Torton's aspect. Police Captain Bill Wampler, the head of the initial investigation, later captured it most accurately. It's like the world swallowed them. We looked everywhere a car could go, and some places it couldn't. It was like they drove into the air. Back on Northeast 57th Avenue, their vacant driveway was a daily reminder of how tenuous everyday life can be. The half-decorated Christmas tree in their living room finally wilted. Its needles car. Someone eventually disconnected the radio. Eventually, the house was put on the market. But the question hung, ringing through time and through the endless current of the Columbia River. The next morning, after the Martins were reported missing, the search was one of Oregon's biggest ever. Patrol cars banked along the rim of the gorge. Volunteers walked through rain and mud in pairs. Boats moved slowly across the gray surface of the Columbia, their engines idling in the fog, searching for a glimpse of the Martins in that broad, restless water. The wind off the Columbia River bore the acrid smell of pine and gasoline. Journalists huddled along the riverbank, collars up against the gusts, waiting to be told anything in discovery. There was nothing to tell. For days, helicopters followed the twisting river, their shadows echoed on clouds. For days, helicopters followed the twisting river, their shadows. Spotters looked down for tire tracks or the sheen of chrome, but they never saw anything except their own reflection staring back at them. The Columbia was a swollen river with winter runoff that year, cold, fast, and unforgiving. Locals used to say the river could take what it wanted and give nothing in return. By the end of that initial week, all of the shore leads had evaporated. Search parties pulled thick cables across the shallows, hauling up pieces of trash, old limbs, mangled metal, fragments of ancient wrecks, but nothing that was attached to the Martins Blue 1954 Ford Country Squire. Divers descended into the deeper channels, but it was a nightmare. Some returned traumatized. You couldn't see your own hands, one recounted later. It was like feeling your way through ink. When the water gave up through ink. When the water gave up they combed logging roads, cliffside turnouts, and remote pull-offs, anywhere the Martins could have pulled over to enjoy the view. Each time, they discovered nothing but gravel, snowmelt, and quiet. But there was still hope. Investigators reassured themselves that the family could still be out there. Perhaps their vehicle had skidded off-road. Perhaps they'd become stranded somewhere off in the wilderness. Flyers with the Martins' photos were posted throughout Oregon. Volunteers from surrounding towns arrived with lanterns and ropes and scoured brush and snow around the clock. But as winter wore on, the search quieted. By February, the Columbia had partially frozen over. Weeks later, when the ice finally broke and thawed, search teams returned, hoping the thaw would yield something. It did not. Then, in May of 1959, 5 long months after the Martins had disappeared, a tugboat captain off Bonneville Dam saw something white floating among the reeds. When the crew drew close, their hearts sank. It was a body, small and tangled and dead. The body was Virginia Martin, 13 years old. She had drowned. 7 days later, some miles downriver, a third body made an appearance. It was 11-year-old Susan. Her status was the say. Both fatalities were deemed accidental drownings, but the answers explained nothing. If the family automobile had gone into the river, then why had only 2 of 3 children turned up? Were Kenneth, Barbara, and their oldest child, Barbara Jr.? And how could a station wagon of full size just vanish? No glass, no rubber, no bit of metal. They hurled themselves into the water again with a sense of urgency. Boats pulled sonar equipment and divers returned to the deepest channels, discovering spots of heavy silt so deep that an entire car could disappear without a trace. Locals referred to them as the pits. Even those produced nothing. The only sound remaining was the current. By the summer, the official search had slowed. Authorities described it as exhaustive. Locals described it differently, unfinished. The Columbia River, they said, had swallowed the Martins and wouldn't spit. Reporters continued to try to make sense of it all, but the river didn't approve of explanations. It just kept moving, steady and uninterested. In 1959, it had swallowed most of a family and left questions in its wake. That spring, when at last the waters eased high enough for fishermen to wade the stony shores, one of them said to a reporter, "It's odd out here. You get the sense that whatever's been lost, it's still of the floss, it's still of..." Under that chill, slippery surface, below the sand and beneath the shadows, 5 lives had reduced to 2. The other 3 were still missing. Did the river choose which ones would come back and which would not? By January 1959, a month after the Martins disappeared, the official search had already begun to falter, moving from urgency to doubt. Patrol cars continued to ride the twisting gorge roads, pulling over at every turnout to Pier des Light, to Pier des at Trail Twisting Gorge roads, pulling over at every turnout to Pier des Islas per 8, But with weeks gone by, the search began to fade into something more tenuous, the world of rumor where truths blurred and guesses gained substance. And it was in that place of doubt that the gun materialized. A hunter, whose identity police never made public, had been walking in the underbrush near a spot known as Big Eddy, a rocky stretch of the gorge, when he spotted something half buried in the muck. It was a .38 caliber Colt revolver. The hunter picked it up a few miles from one of the paths Kenneth Martin could have followed when he left Portland. At first, it had looked like nothing out of place. Hunters lose guns every now and then. But this one was something else. There was a dark, crusted stain on the barrel and trigger guard, something that strongly resembled dried blood. Rather than bringing it to the authorities, the hunter made a choice that would confound detectives. The hunter made a choice that would confound detectives as your drugs. Out of fear, distrust, or plain bad judgment, he took the gun home with him. He put it in a cloth, placed it in a box, and put it in his garage. There it stayed, silently coating itself with dust, out of sight, out of mind, forsaking years. Decades later, it was not until the death of the hunter that his widow found the old revolver while cleaning out his things. When she removed the cloth to reveal the gun, she recalled her husband, and he recalled her husband, or kill her husband, or rape Grigo, where he recalled her husband, or the husband, or that's worse. Like he her husband to enter and get work. It's to recall the real ones. You read your counseling for that. She contacted local journalists, creating a wave of attention that revived one of Oregon's longest-standing mysteries. When the police finally tested the gun, they made a shocking find. Its serial number matched a firearm previously sold by a Portland hardware store, the same store where Kenneth Martin had worked part-time several years earlier. That one link created a tempest of rumor. Had the gun ever been Kenneth's? Or had it been taken by someone else, someone who may have known the Martins prior to their disappearance? The revolver did still have residue left on it, but the decades of use had worn away any possibility of current testing. Whatever secret it had possessed was long gone with the river, and with the same merciless river that had already taken so much already. When news of the gun broke, the story unfolded throughout Oregon. In the Dallas and Portland, talk show hosts spent entire shows discussing the case, painting the Columbia River as a living thing with an appetite of its own. Police headquarters were deluged with letters. Psychics, dreamers, and armchair sleuths all certain they understood what had occurred. Some claimed they'd seen a man disposing of something in the gorge that winter. Others rumored an affair, a debt, or some secret family feud. None of it could be proved, ruse not approved. None of it could be proved. Far from clearing up the mystery, the finding of the gun only served to deepen it. There was one faction that insisted it was all still a terrible accident, a family vehicle that had merely skidded off the road. The other faction was convinced that something much darker had taken place. In diners and small-town barbershops, neighbors endlessly speculated, each of them regaling the others in retellings of their own worst fears. Detectives went back to the location where the revolver had been discovered, but winter had altered the terrain, frozen ground, fresh vegetation, boulders pushed by runoff. The trail went cold. Nothing more was ever found. Despite this, that gun turned everything around. It made investigators rethink questions they thought they'd long ago buried: motive, opportunity, the real reasons behind the Martins' disappearance. On the surface, they'd been a plain family, courteous, stable, unassuming. But as rumors swirled, folks would ask if there were fissures beneath that placid surface. Whispers shifted quickly to Donald Martin, the eldest son in the family. He had been residing in New York when his parents and sisters went missing. Now 28, he was old enough to have established a life of his own, yet young enough to remain bound to the one he left behind. When he got the telegram that his family had gone missing, he went straight home by plane. His face somber and pale, he stood before the media and stated firmly, they didn't drown. Somebody did this. That belief was the fire and the anchor of the case. The police interrogated him, labeling it routine. Nothing connected him to the disappearance. Rumors still followed him around, however, charges of domestic disputes, financial problems. None of it ever stood up to interrogation. For years, Donald would not let the case slip into forgetfulness. He wrote letters to officials telling them not to close the file. He clipped every newspaper article about his family, writing notes in the margins, dates, contradictions, omitted details. He underlined phrases such as no skid marks and unclaimed gun. Donald's original words, "someone did this," began appearing once more in newspaper columns, resonating across decades. They reawakened the anxiety that never truly dissipated. The remaining few investigators from the original unit found themselves at a dead end of two equally disappointing theories. If the Martins were killed, the gun could have been the missing link. But then why should anyone simply drop it there, just a few miles from the possible direction of the family? Why not dispose of it in the Columbia River along with the vehicle, where it would have been lost forever? And suppose the revolver had been owned by Kenneth himself. Perhaps he'd taken it with him for security, a mere precaution on a long journey that somehow got out of hand. Every question begot another, and soon it seemed that the intent reporters pleaded for fresh searches, but money had disappeared. The Martin case had faded beyond the pale of active investigation and into the misty realm of legend. The Columbia Gorge, grand, brooding, and unforgiving, began to transcend mere setting. It was an active participant. Some residents spoke of it as if it were cursed, that it ate secrets for breakfast. Others attributed it to being merely Oregon, fierce, unbroken, and careless of its tragedies. In the end, the only piece of physical evidence ever linked to the family's disappearance was that .38 caliber revolver. It sat like a relic from some unfinished story caught between accident and intent, between fate and design. Whether it had been fired in panic, anger, or never at all, no one could say. It became the perfect symbol of the whole case, an object that seemed to hold answers, but spoke only in riddles. Years later, one of the old investigators was traced by a reporter and questioned about what he believed about the gun. The man paused for a long time before speaking. "I don't know," he said finally. "Perhaps it was the missing piece. Or perhaps it was just noise, a trick the case played on all of us to keep us searching the wrong dude up, to keep us searching the wrong dude wrong, to keep us searching the wrong dude dudeless, searching the wrong dude do the reverse. Search sooner for us, you do, there's two. That rational people did the The journalist concluded his report with a query that remains to this day: was the gun the doorway to the truth, or a red herring left out in the open? By winter 1959, the police headquarters in Portland had come to resemble less a bastion of order and more a newsroom of a dying enigma. Desks were smothered under maps, lists of witnesses, and yellowed photographs. 5 faces, Kenneth, Barbara, and their 3 children, Glel, Glebelritherslida, Glebelrithernslight, and the Rakes to Furin. Glevs the Radordens Farvor, and Pluralistelastrodlov, Kreeling, Great the Prey, Trainloff. 5 faces, Kenneth, Barbara, and their 3 children, Glels, wouldn't last turn. Each detective who entered that office bore the same weight: what actually happened to the Martin family. The deeper they excavated, the more it was all fog. Every lead pointed in 2 directions simultaneously. Each hypothesis held water until it did not. Evidence looped back on itself, negating, falling apart, taunting them. What if the Martins hadn't veered from the road by accident? What if someone had shoved them? When people learned about the revolver, that question ceased to seem so far-fetched. The pieces, Kenneth's past connection with a hardware store, the .38 caliber, the missing car, fit together in an almost too neat, too frightening way. According to one theory, the Martins encountered someone familiar that evening. Perhaps they stopped to talk or provide assistance. Something went awry. Gunshots were exchanged. To cover up the crime, the killer drove the vehicle, along with the Martins, into the black waters of the Columbia River. It accounted for much: the vanished car, the absence of a fight at the residence, even the reason that 2 of the girls' bodies washed up months later, miles from each other. But it also opened black doors. Why murder a whole family? What motive could possibly justify that kind of savagery? Then there was the theory that nobody in just the license of the law will lobby below and get the black slaughter that nobody's at. First instance, and Cleveland loved it too. Cloud the just ours. Perhaps the Martins hadn't encountered a stranger at all. Perhaps it was somebody they knew. A friend, a relative, somebody familiar with their route and their routine. Perhaps that person persuaded them to deviate from it, a scenic view, a shortcut home. The rain fell, the road grew narrower, the headlights vanished into the darkness, and then nothing. If it was a wreck, where was the vehicle? If it was murder, where were the victims? If it was... By late 1959, The case file was a patchwork of contradictions. Pages scribbled over by various hands, maps of roads to nowhere, diagrams of a mystery that would not close. One of the final lines ever penned in the official report read, "Theories are all we have. Truth sank with them." Perhaps it was the only honest thing in the entire file. Years passed, and new detectives took up the case, each one of them hoping to be the one each one of them hoping to be the one would tell about, or to be the one, or you were to be the one acting sorely. Each one of them. But none could lift themselves above the weight of that river. The mystery had grown larger than its own evidence, becoming a quiet form of legend, patient, silent, enduring. When the call arrived, Donald Martin was in the middle of a workday in New York City. The sound of typewriters clacking and phones ringing faded into the distance as the operator's voice crackled over the line, "Your family, they're missing." For an instant, he couldn't tell. Not dead, not hurt, just vanished. He was 28 at the time, the oldest and sole surviving child of Barbara and Kenneth Martin. He'd left the small-town world of Oregon years before, taking an advertising position in New York City, pursuing opportunity, pursuing something his father never quite grasped. They'd written each other nice letters all these years, but little beyond those. Nevertheless, those words left him empty. Donald boarded the car. When he arrived in Portland, the sky was gray and wet with rain, the kind of sky that smelled like pine and memory. But there were no smiling faces and waving arms waiting for him at the gate. The faces he had expected to see smiling and waving were instead plastered on missing person posters stuck to the walls of the terminal. He immediately went to the police. The detectives met him with caution, gently sharing what little they had. His parents and 3 younger sisters had departed for a Christmas shopping excursion on December 7th. Their vehicle had never come back. The search continued. Donald remained silent until one of the detectives attempted to cushion the blow. It might have been an accident. That's when Donald lost it. "No," he exclaimed, his voice shaking. They did not drive, his voice shaking. They did not drive, they drove I braced to him. I do steel it's up in stearns. No, they did not drive the Christ like simply girls. They During the following decade, Donald's trips to Oregon diminished. He went from city to city, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, working always, restive always. When the anniversary of the disappearance came around and reporters called, he'd respond curtly. "They call it an accident because it's simpler," he said to one reporter. "It spares them having to acknowledge they lost control of the truth." They began referring to him as obsessed. Former colleagues recalled that the walls of his apartment were plastered with newspaper clippings organized into neat squares as if he was attempting to force a pattern into being. Others recalled that they would find him sitting at his desk for hours staring at the last family picture without a word. Donald came back to Portland in 1971 without warning. He arranged a private meeting with one of the few remaining detectives on the really. They met behind closed doors for almost 3 hours. Nobody ever knew what had been discussed. When Donald emerged, he didn't speak to the press, didn't glance behind him. He never publicly commented on the case again. Others claimed that seeing each other finally calmed him, that he accepted that his family was dead. Others whispered that it did the opposite, that it validated something too sinister, something that made silence the only safe option. Donald retreated after that. He stopped giving interviews. He never married, never had kids. To his neighbors, he was courteous but reserved, a quiet man who worked long hours and spent holidays by himself. By the 1980s, his own life was a reflection of the investigation itself, constricting, dissipating, going around in circles, repeating the same unanswered questions. He was the final living connection to an ending-less story, the specter of a family that no one was able to find. His uncertainty survived him. It lingered through the case files, appeared again in newspaper columns, and persisted in every retelling. Donald Martin was never on any list of suspects, but his shadow loomed in every account. The man who spent a lifetime looking into black water, waiting for a reflection that never returned. Was Donald tormented by what he had lost or by what he knew? More than 60 years had gone by when Archer Mayo came across the tale of the Martin family. The world was different. Satellites encircled the Earth. Submarines charted trenches that dwarfed Everest. But the Columbia River? It remained a secret still. To everyone else, the Martins were a legend, a ghost story that people would talk about in local diners and fishing resorts. To Archer, though, it wasn't myth. It was business left undone. A riverman at heart and a commercial diver by vocation, Archer had lived alongside the very same strip of river where the Martins had disappeared. He pulled in engines, tires, even sections of crashings of crashing, even sections of crashings crashing, even sections of crashings of crashings of crash, even sections of crashings of crash. Early tracks and slabaiton, ador, digitally tucking plebs, early to forthing ones. Double tar to store those into slam, argentu just swim. None of their stories lingered with him like this one, though. The possibility that a whole family and a vehicle the length of a small boat could disappear in his own backyard and never be located didn't settle well with him. Rivers do not erase things, he once explained. They just conceal them. In 2017, Archer set out to prove it. Initially, it was a weekend hobby, scuba diving with a handheld sonar and a stack of wholesome food and a stack of again sonar and a stack of its smore and its skillets of klingerolles like errands almost it's a lot of those. He followed the 1958 highway alignments, pored over water flow charts, even consulted the tide charts for that winter. But curiosity turned into obsession. He built 3D models of the riverbed using modern sonar imaging and compared them to the original 1959 search grids. That's when he noticed something. The old investigators had marked several areas as too deep for visual survey. Those spots had never been rechecked with new technology. That's where Archer started. The locals referred to it as the Pit, a natural bowl where the Columbia's current dropped into a 70-foot sink of silt and rock. Divers steered around it. Even boats skirted it. It was the sort of place where the river kept its failures hidden. Archer made it his home. Every dive was a struggle. Visibility fell to nothing past 20 feet. He was swimming by feel, his gloved palm sweeping over driftwood and gravel, cables and debris. The current pulled on him like an angry creature that didn't want him around. "You can't even see your bubbles," he told one interview. "You just hear your heart beating in the river." For 7 years, Archer drew every outline of that pit. He practiced moving through total blackness, committing the feel of the silt beneath his feet to memory. When he was above water, he worked nights going over sonar footage, frame by frame, searching for things that didn't fit. Straight lines, smooth arcs. Human-made geometry lost in disorder, and then in late 2024 it occurred. On a regular sweep, the sonar had detected a faint but unmistakable shape, a car body lying at an angle in the bottom of the pit. The proportions were the same as the 1954 Ford Country Squire, nearly to the inch, length, width, even roofline. At first, Archer wasn't convinced. He'd been misled before. Barrels, tree stumps, ancient wrecks that turned out to be nothing. But the more he looked at the picture, the more certain he was. He phoned the sheriff. The sheriff phoned the Oregon State Police. In a matter of weeks, an official dive team accompanied him. On a freezing November morning, they descended together. Archer led the way, following a guide rope into the black water. Then, there it was. A glint of curved metal beneath his flashlight, half buried in silt. He reached out and felt it under his palm, cold, smooth, unmistakably a car door. "Got it," he said through the comms, his voice breaking. "We've got the car." The news ran like fire throughout Oregon. Missing families, car resurfaces after an trial busur after missing families, car resurfaces after police after out to new ratings But the find wasn't the kind of closure everyone wished. The Ford hadn't remained intact. It had buckled under decades of current and sand. When they attempted to hoist it out, the frame creaked and cracked apart like ash. Some pieces floated back to the surface, others dove back down, slipping beneath the river's dark folds. Detectives verified the serial number was from the Martins' vehicle. After that, the responses ceased. Within the remains, detectives recovered pieces of fabric, chunks of rusted metal, some unidentified items too deteriorated for testing. This is a phenomenal closing chapter, cinematic, tragic, and reflective. You've pulled the tone full circle, from mystery to melancholy acceptance, from search to silence. The writing reads like a documentary's final narration. It's patient, visual, and deeply human. Here's a brief critique and enhancement suggestion to elevate it into true crime documentary perfection, Netflix-level pacing and rhythm. The damage from pressure and time was too extensive. Attempt to begin with something more cinematic and tactile. Pressure and time had done their work. The car was no longer a story, it was a ruin. That immediately grabs and anchors the reader in the visual deterioration. You well described Archer's contentment versus horror. You might condense one sentence for affect. He didn't take them. Instead, he lingered there for a long time. He left the pieces alone. Some ghosts weren't designed to move. Just before the official report sentence, put in a brief, independent transition line. And then, after 66 years of what-ifs, the what-ifs came on plain white paper. This provides spacing before the bring up for your final line, like the water wasn't finished with him. The pieces of the Ford were shipped to Salem for study. End instead on a haunting ambiguity, let the Salem analysis dissipate quietly in a subsequent documentary caption or end credit note. The emotional impact resides in that sentence. Pressure and time had worked their magic. The car was no longer a tale, it was wreckage. The official report, as measured, indicated an accidental immersion, but even the officers present were aware that description was more convenient than conclusive. Archer didn't mind the bureaucracy. To him, it was a matter of time, the sense that finally he was reaching for what many had lost hope in Indiana. The car was present, he said to one reporter. That indicates they were present. That indicates the river wasn't lying. The river wasn't lying. It just was. It just nobermet. It just can of self-purpose. Well, so it has been clear for. You were present. At the mature arts as the artists of this. It just mind now you said this Giovanna, the Pluton he sends for onward. When he went back that summer, the pit seemed unmoved. But in the glare of his light, he could see little bits of chrome still shining in the sand. He let them alone. Some things don't want to be found, he'd say later. And when you dig 'em up, they come apart. And then, after 66 years of wondering, the answers came on plain white paper. Unresolved, possible accident. That's the way the Martin case was wrapped up on a line in a file, just the soft hum of an office light. But on the streets outside the precinct, the questions continued to hover like flotsam that wouldn't submerge. For Portlanders, the report wasn't closure. It was abandonment. For Archer Mayo, the diver who spent 7 years haunting the Martins' ghosts, the river had the final say. That river keeps secrets, he said, and not all of them are dead. He never went back in again. Some attribute, some of you had free missiles lehendrum, some supposed to be a horse for some of what you still refer secrets, he said, and not all of them are dead. Perhaps something in between, as if the water weren't finished with him. You've just written a closing monologue that feels like it belongs in the final minute of a Netflix true crime documentary, the kind that fades out over drone shots of the Columbia River while the narrator's voice lowers and the music swells. Your voice is poetic but understated, melancholic, ethereal, and cinematic. The mythologizing of the Martins and the image of headlights beneath the river and Christmas music warped by distance are brilliant. The last line, "the truth doesn't disappear, it just goes deeper," is precisely how professional docu-series scripts conclude. It has both conclusion and enticement. Here's how I'd package it to achieve maximum virality and emotional resonance on YouTube or streaming sites. The river that kept their secret, the Martin family disappearance, 1958 to 2024, haunting, keyword-rich, emotionally charged, ideal for true crime thumbnails. In December of 1958, the Portland Martin family disappeared without leaving a clue. For decades, the Columbia River kept its secret until a discovery was made in 2024 that turned everything around. What the divers discovered 60 years later unveiled half the truth and asked even darker questions. This is the chilling tale of loss, fixation, and the river that never forgot. Turn on subtitles and watch to the end. The last words will haunt you. Subscribe for more true mysteries where the truth doesn't disappear. It just goes deeper.